Hello everyone, my name is Ian Carruthers. I'm the chairman of the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board. I'm very pleased to be able to join you today, although it's only virtually at this stage, to give you, if you like, my perspective on implementing accrual-based accounting, lessons learned and experiences. And I say that from both the perspective of chairing the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, but also from my previous experience working in the UK Treasury, where I led the implementation of whole of public sector accounts. So a lot of what I say is very much from my own practical experience as much as from the IPSASB perspective. So firstly, I thought it was useful just to fill you in for those that haven't encountered IPSASB before on who we are. And we're the global public sector financial reporting standard setter, so we're the equivalent of the private sector International Accounting Standards Board. And currently we have 38 accrual-based financial reporting standards, so we cover the majority of areas of public sector transactions that you're likely to meet in practice. Our standards are developed through transparent due process, which means that we very much depend on interaction with groups like this and formal consultations to get input to our work. And we have our own independent oversight from not only colleagues at the World Bank, but also IMF, OECD and the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions. Our activities are funded to a great extent by the accountancy profession through the International Federation of Accountants, but also importantly, given this event, Asia Development Bank are a strong funder of ours and have been for many years, and also a number of governments around the world support us. In terms of the board itself, just to give you a bit of colour on that, we're an 18-member board, all volunteers apart from myself, and literally everybody comes from all around the world. So this just shows you where those members come from. They're preparers, auditors, standard setters, academics, a lot of very different backgrounds in addition to a lot of different areas of experience, and that really strengthens our standard setting. In particular, I'd point to the fact that we have 4 members from the Asia region, from Malaysia, China, Japan, and from the Philippines. So again, a range of different perspectives and expertise. How do we direct our work? Well, we're currently in the final year of our 5-year strategy and work plan, and overall that's directed at strengthening public financial management through the increasing adoption of accrual-based IPSAS. And it's very important to us as a board, and also in terms of the guidance that we set for our constituents, that we have that public financial management lens. It isn't just about reporting for the sake of reporting, it's about really taking into account what will actually strengthen public financial management as we develop our guidance. And our work concentrates on 2 areas. The first is delivering global standards, not only developing new standards for the public sector, but also making sure that our existing suite of standards is up to date with changes in not only the private sector, but also that we react to feedback that we get from you, our stakeholders, in terms of how the standards are working in practice. And the second area we call inspiring implementation. And obviously, this is directly relevant to today's event. So that's very much about how you use IPSAS, and also promoting and raising awareness of the advantages of using the standards. So what's going on around the world then in terms of the move to accrual? This was picked up through the 2021 survey on accrual adoption around the world. It was the second report that was published, a joint production between IFAC and colleagues at the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. And between those first two reports, what it did show was that the level of accrual adoption had risen by 6% to 30%, and also this comprised more extensive data across 165 jurisdictions. Now, it wasn't just about what had happened between 2018 and the snapshot in 2020. We also looked at plans for accrual implementation around the world, and based on the detailed plans that the team had access to, the forecast was that the level of accrual implementation would move up to 50% by 2025, and then projections to move up to 30%, up to 70% by 2030. And you can see that strong upward trend from pure cash and partial accrual to accrual shown in these bar charts here. Alongside that, we looked at, well, which framework for reporting would jurisdictions be using, and that also showed a strong upward swing in terms of IPSAS usage and influence, really because those countries that do not have or have not had their own standard setting organisations and frameworks are now preferring to use IPSAS as the international standards for the public sector. And implementing the standards then actually gives you much greater comparability with other governments. Important, for example, in terms of providing information to the international organisations and also for the global bond markets. Turning then away from the international picture, but reflecting on lessons learned in terms of national adoption, really one of the key takeaways is this isn't something that you can say this is how it will happen. It's very much dependent on the way in which the various different key players work together at the national level, and that differs between countries. Also, you need to focus on the fact that adopting the standards, the decision to actually use accrual, is very different from finally implementing it. A number of countries actually do get stuck along the way for a variety of reasons. That may be not that political support weakens, it may be practical problems, capacity problems, and so on. But the key ingredients you can see here across the columns at the top, you certainly need strong support from the profession, the professional accountancy organisations. Governments play a key role. Generally, they will need additional support from consultants and contractors in the initial implementation phase, and they will also need support from the international organisations and regional organisations. So networks like PEMNA are very important. And importantly, actually, the Supreme Audit institutions can play a really important role as advocates and then in supporting implementation. And you can see those different players can play different roles at different stages and different aspects of the reform. So financial support certainly needed from government in terms of systems and training, but also from external organisations as well. That's generally a feature of the reforms. Capacity development being important as well as you move from cash to accrual, and a number of players there, as well as technical and practical guidance coming from different sources. And then it's not just enough to actually equip people with qualifications, you need continuous professional development as well. So a lot of different aspects, and really that's why I say it takes a village. You need input from all of these groups, and you need that coordinated in order for implementation to be successful. Now, from the point of view of IPSASB is a standard setter and doesn't actually provide support for individual implementation projects around the world. But that's something where the International Federation of Accountants is leading on adoption and implementation, working with IPSASB. One of the key developments recently was the development of a digital platform for sharing experience about the key features of accrual implementation. And this website includes a lot of guidance, but also is intended to gradually build as a repository of experience sharing by those implementing accrual reporting. It links it into strong public financial management and governance, as I'll talk about in a minute. It also underlines the fact that, again, there is no one way to implement accrual, so there are a variety of accrual transition approaches, pathways. Also, though it does give you the kind of key things to think about in terms of implementation tasks, including building capacity. So that's available via the IFAC website, free to air. If you're planning an implementation program or you're midway through it, I would strongly encourage you to have a look at that. An idea of the high-level areas that it covers, so setting it in the context of broader public financial management and budget framework reforms, looking at the governance overall and also for the program itself, setting the reforms in the context of PFM reforms, and then how you actually run the accrual implementation in terms of key features of the strategy, capacity building, looking at the various different areas where change will be required in terms of accounting standards and policies, and then also the sorts of issues that individual entities will need to consider in order to make the implementation successful. So a lot of different things to think about, but Pathways to Accrual brings the thinking together on that. In terms of the approach, I think it is very important that this isn't just about reporting, it's about the way the public finances are actually run. And that's where you can't divorce public financial management from governance. What I'm referring to here is the guidance that IFAC and CIPFA issued a few years back on which was called an International Framework for Good Governance in the Public Sector. And in developing that, one of the key features was this idea that public sector organisations should always act in the public interest. They should look at what outcomes they're actually trying to deliver and ensure that they're trying to deliver those on a sustainable basis, whether you look at that in economic, environmental, social or governance terms. Thinking backwards from that, then in terms of what do they need to deliver on those objectives in terms of interventions, and then thinking, okay, what does the organisation need in order to deliver those? And you'll see from this diagram on the right-hand side, the idea is that then those principles then interact with the whole system approach to public financial management. So the two feed off each other and interact. The whole system approach is an idea that CIPFA developed, that this is about a system. It's not any one element that exists in isolation. You need to actually think about the whole thing systemically in terms of the checks and balances that are there. You know, you very often see a situation where maybe there are good reforms to the budget framework, but then those fail because other areas are in terms of capacity or systems aren't in place, and therefore the reforms actually ultimately fail. And the idea here is that all jurisdictions can improve in certain areas. This is very much a similar philosophy to the PIFA framework, and also on the accounting side, the PULSE framework that the World Bank have been developing recently, and certainly the whole system approach maps to PIFA framework. But very much it's this fundamental about the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. You need everything to work together, be they the standards and legislation, the systems, or the capacity and the way in which the controls are implemented and how those then link back into governance. So think about the whole thing together. And just coming towards the end then, as well, thinking about how broadly can you use the information. Certainly one of the failings in my own jurisdiction, the UK, was that when we initially implemented accrual, it was just about accounting. We didn't actually think, how could we maximise the overlap between budgeting and accounting, and how could we maximise the overlap between budgeting and accounting, and the statistical framework that macroeconomists use in order to manage the economy. Now, the more that you can use the same information for all of those purposes, the stronger public financial management will become, because then you're using the same information at all stages of the management process, right up front in terms of budget policy, appropriations by the legislature, through in-year monitoring to end-of-year reporting, and then during that time feeding up into the national statistics that are prepared. And the fact that you're not only managing on that basis, but then you're getting close to one version of the truth in terms of the public finances is then very important for external stakeholders, be those in the legislature, in financial markets, in terms of assessing the risks attached to government bonds, in terms of comparison of performance between international and regional organisations, use of the data that they collect and that they use for comparison purposes. And of course, for all of us, we all pay taxes. It's really important that we understand how that money has been spent and that we can be assured that we really understand the full picture, because cash doesn't provide that. Only accrual will provide that, which is why it needs to be at the centre of strong public financial management. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope to be able to join you later on today for questions and answers. And I wish you a successful and interesting event in the meantime. Thank you very much for listening.